All right, here we go, continuing to struggle with Illustrator to get our sketch to work out. And now you're starting to see, since I introduced you to the blob brush, I can get a lot of this, of what I intend with my logo, or my family crest here, my shield. I can get a lot of it to go through pretty cleanly with the blob brush. But I have to kind of decide what's going to be solid black, what's not, and how clean do I want it. Remember, as long as I have all my layers, and I know what's going on with them, at any time I can work with these individually. And right now I'm going to work with the eye hole a little bit. What I like so much about Illustrator is it lets you work on both sides of a line, because this isn't an outline, this is a filled path. It's like cutout paper. So I can go to this cutout and kind of redraw that shape until it's what I want. And if I want it hard-edged, I want to make sure I draw it hard-edged. Or if I want it rounded, I draw it rounded. And if I want to simplify it, I can use tools like the Smooth tool. As long as I can see the anchors, I can use these tools. And if I don't like what I did, I can hit Command-Z, use my pencil tool, work with it again. Now the Shaper tool is new to this version, Creative Cloud 2015. And I'm really curious what the Shaper tool does. Oh, so it's nicely, so I can move. Let's see, what did it do? Oh, I see. So I can take that hole that I made. This is new. Because remember, that's just cut out. And I can slightly reposition it with the Shaper tool. I have to be dragging it from an anchor. But that's really handy, instead of having to move all the anchor points individually. That might be something you want to use for the Shaper tool. Okay, and then I'll turn off my sketch and see, okay, this is what I have so far. Is it communicating clearly? Well, I think this mark here, I'm going to unlock that layer, just the tongue, and I'm going to reshape that a little bit. Just make it a little bit thicker. When I use the blob brush, I might limit it. Maybe a better way is to select the anchor. Since there's so few anchor points here, I can just drag this one down a little. There we go. So maybe a better way to use the blob brush is for me to not have its variation be the full 4 points. Maybe limit it to only 3 points so it can't get super thin anymore. That's about the thinnest it can get. But once I get inside, I'm going to want to be able to go that thin on it. Okay, so I'm locking everything. I go up to the top, make a new layer. Now I'm going to work with the sketch on. And if I want the sketch, let's unlock it. If I double click on it, this is just for while you're working, and you often do this with the sketch layer. If you double click on it, the same way you would get blending modes and layer styles in Photoshop, you can then dim your image to 50% or whatever percentage you want, and that makes it a little bit easier to trace over. So I'll lock it with that dimming. And now, remember, locking your layers, wonderful method, because you're only able to paint and add where your layers are. I'm going to continue with my blob brush. Try to make beautiful things happen. Trying to think fluid thoughts. The other reason not to allow it to go too thin is because this needs to be a symbol that's effective at a lot of different sizes. Now with the blob brush, let me see if I can repaint it. So I can add to it, but I can't reshape it like I can with the pencil. So you see this curve I kind of missed? So I'm going to go to the pencil, and I'm going to try to get that curve in there. But it's hard because there's not that many inkers. There we go. And so if your blob brush, you like it, but it made something too thick, you can always thin it with your pencil. If you have a little boo-boo like there, where I overlapped, you can just clean it up with your pencil and the smooth tool, or a little place here where it's kind of hinged in. Now that's an overlap I'll fix with the eagles layer right there. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. And once I'm happy with a part, like maybe I go back to the eagles layer, and since that's the only thing showing, I can just go ahead and use the eraser and just trim it right there. So it follows along with the blob brush. Or, actually I kind of like it, dipping down like that. So maybe I'll fix it on the other end. And then I can use the smooth tool to round it out. As long as it only softens what I need it to soften. All right, that looks pretty good. Okay, now because I'm doing this little barrel here, or furrow, in this middle spike thing, this flare on the samurai helmet, I'm going to use the blob brush, but set it to have more variation, full variation, so I can go really thin at the tip. I wanted something more like that. I wasn't able to press it as much. So now, because it's the only layer that's open, I can use the eraser and I can kind of trim it, thin it out that way. It's like using whiteout after you've inked something. But the eraser is not a very smooth tool, so then I'm going to select it, then I'm going to use the smooth. And it will keep it as skinny, but it will smooth it out, like so. So on and on, just kind of perfecting it, working with it. That's what you want. Okay, so now these kind of chopstick things, they're actually from the Rosenthal logo. And I want, because my father liked that brand of china so much, I want to steal as much from it as I can, respectfully. And so here are the little crossed bars from it, as its own symbol. So I'm going to select those, copy them, lock the layer they come from, and hide it because I don't want it. Make a new layer on top, and say Edit, Paste. Use my large selection tool. Hold down Shift, see if I can get those in place. And I need them to be kind of very particular in where they're oriented, because I want it to kind of help with the mask. Now you can also use rulers with Command R and guides within Illustrator. So I'm going to find my center line, just like you can in Photoshop. I'm going to move the guide over a little bit. So I think I want to work for that being the center more. So I actually might move the Rosenthal crown a little bit from my drawing. That will help me figure out where these crossbars should go. I use my arrow keys a lot. That's going to be a pretty good placement. Maybe tighten it a little bit up on the top. Hold down Option, just squeeze them in. It's all a negotiation. Right now I'm trying to figure out where the perfect center would be. I think that's the center I want. All right. So now with this element, it's just anchor points. I'm going to flip that, and I'm going to use a stroke for the first time. And you can see that the stroke, just so you can see it, is an outline, and I have an empty fill. Okay, so a stroke with an empty fill. And then I can adjust how thick that stroke is up at the top. But you see how right now it's just a very mechanical stroke. It's the same thickness everywhere. It's called uniform. I can play with that. I can make it go thick to thin, which I think I'm going to want to go, because that's a little bit more like the style of my logo. I can make it wavy, but that doesn't make too much sense down there, so I like the thick to thin better, at least at the top. I can go lopsided, which is kind of interesting. I can also just play with different sizes within that. And then I can try oval as opposed to just round or even on all sides. And you can even try these decorative ones. I like this sketch one. It's good for kind of organic effects. The problem with strokes is they scale up like fonts scale up. So they're not filled paths. They're always wrapped around filled paths. So they're a little less predictable. So I try to not do too much with them if I can help it. But I do like the oval stroke when I use them. Okay. So even though that's oval and uniform, that works pretty well. I can play with its thickness, and you can do decimals. So you can get, exact sizing. Okay, now that I have them as a stroke to kind of inform, let me cinch them up, kind of put them in place. And it's thinking about the negative space around them and the shapes they create. I know I wanted to cut down through there. And maybe I'm just going to thin that stroke a little bit. Maybe to 0.8. Okay. Save that. Now, just like layers of paper, I can move that layer down below some of these other things as I start to fill it in. But that's a guide for me, and I know that those will come back. So I'm going to lock that, make a new layer on top, and now I'll just continue working with my blob brush. Oh, let me move the crown since I've recentered it. I'm going to keep that center guide there. Select it with the large tool, just use my arrow keys. Okay. So I'm going to tighten my sketch as I go and try to improve upon it. So far, that's what I've got. Here we have the nose guard of the Samurai helmet.